I will try to cover a bit of this territory by saying that from the very beginning I thought that the university is a place where you can connect the present to the past and to the future. I believe that in our life, in human life, it's a place where we can connect ourselves to the world, embracing human societies, cultures, diversity, this incredible diversity of the world. And at the same time, you realize that there is a place where people lend to one another their sensitivities, sensibilities, experiences. And no matter whether we read Plato, Aristotle, St. Augustine, or say very important Muslim thinkers or Jewish sages or modern thinkers, whether we study modern art or great Renaissance geniuses of art, it's all about the same: human creativity, human life, existential challenges. I deeply believe, and I think this is part of university life, that the challenges that people were facing in the 15th century are very much the same we're facing today. It's about creativity, it's about ourselves, it's about individuality vis-a-vis the rest of society, it's about friendship, loyalty, love, betrayal, ideals, cynicism, human choices. It's all about the same, and that's why I think it immensely increases our human connectivity, our sensibility, and we understand that everything is with us. Every second, every minute, we can experience the past, we can experience the present, we have the route to the future. This is exactly what university is to me, and I deeply believe that the university will be able to outlive any institution we know today. Look, universities exist from such ancient times. In Europe, we know that it was University of Bologna, the University of Bologna, which was established in the 12th century, 1166. But at the same time, we know that in Marrakesh, for instance, in Morocco, some philosophers, sages, people who were able to share their experiences in Spain, for instance, they created something like academic circles that was an anticipation of the university we know today. Of course, you know the place called Andalusia in Spain and the city of Cordoba, where the great physician, philosopher, logician Ibn Rushd, or Averroes in Latinized form, lived. He had his Arabian Jewish disciples. What is incredible is that even Ben Maimonides, a Jewish scholar who lived there, he went to Marrakesh to establish his own school. Yes, we know that in Europe, universities were able to connect Czechs, Poles, Lithuanians, Spaniards, the French, Britons, and the university with Latin, then with modern languages, were able to transcend people differences by connecting them into one academic family. But look, it was in the 11th century or even earlier that academic circles were able to transcend people's backgrounds. For them, the most important thing was erudition, dedication to scholarship, and know one's riches or political might or prestige. That's why I believe the university is something where people can establish their fellowship. It doesn't matter whether we are young or older. It doesn't matter if you are rich or not so. But the point is that we establish ourselves on the grounds of our creativity, dedication to human inspiration, human life, the future of the world. And that's why we had so many states, we had so many empires. Look, they vanished, leaving no trace in the air. But the university still exists, and it will exist forever.
Thank you, Linus. I especially like this idea of empathy, love, friendship, making connections, making personal relations. I think when we choose, because here we have students of the first year students mainly, or perhaps also older students, I think very often we look very closely and think about academic disciplines, what we would like to study or whom we would like to become when we are thinking about our choices, when we are making our choices. We too much think of disciplines, facts, figures, and we forget about ideas or ideals that you mentioned, empathy, friendship, really knowing whom we are becoming in the process of learning, in the process of getting to know a discipline, in the process of getting to know my fellow friend, my fellow professor. So I think that's the biggest asset that we can really find at universities, that we can really find at academia. And I believe that through those processes we are really learning who we really are in this very beautiful but also very complex and very uncertain world.
Absolutely, scholarship has always been about love, friendship, and loyalty. Of course, I would say in a very playful manner that even the story of Abelard and Héloïse is a medieval story about love, which was at the same time an academic story about how a very talented girl became the source of inspiration for a great French philosopher and at the same time the reason for his tragedy. But look at the Renaissance in Italy. These people were not university scholars. The greatest Renaissance thinkers sometimes were nothing, they had nothing to do with their university affiliation. If we have a look at Florence in the 15th century, what is incredible is that the greatest artists, such as Sandro Botticelli, for instance, or Filippo Lippi, they had their friends who were very learned people. And sometimes these learned people, they used to get together discussing many things and suggesting some topics and themes. For instance, Angelo Poliziano, a Florentine humanist, suggested that Botticelli paint the birth of Venice, or La Primavera, the springtime. The most beautiful things painted by Botticelli came as an inspiration from a scholarly conversation with Poliziano, Angelo Poliziano, which was about how ancient divinities and mythology can inspire an Italian painter. But then Botticelli converted to Catholicism very strongly. He became very pious, and it was after Savonarola, Girolamo Savonarola, that he became very, very pious, rejecting a big part of his creativity and his work as a heresy. But finally, the point was that these people made it up through friendships. They were not department colleagues. They were not the research center or department colleagues. They were not professors vis-a-vis students. They were friends. Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, Angelo Poliziano, Marsilio Ficino, they were all friends. And they believed that 4 or 5 people, very creative, very talented, they believed that they were able to challenge the whole schools. And that was the fact of life. So that's why I believe that, look, if we think about what it's like to have a student, we have to say something very obvious. Every student will become a teacher. Every teacher should find in herself or himself a student. Otherwise, you would be unable to teach. If I happen to be a teacher unable to be in the shoes of a student, I'm a very poor teacher. Because if I am able just to change my seats with you and to sit among you and to listen to one of you, so then I show my vitality and my ability just to stand in your shoes and to become one of you. And this is a very normal condition because curiosity, human curiosity, is a major condition without which it's impossible to have a university or a school. Because every professor was a student. Every student has a chance to become a professor or a teacher. Everything is changing. And that's why human positions, abilities, disposition of power, it may change at any time. What remains is human connection. You were friends, and it came as an inspiration. But I think it's so obvious because when we think about very old forms of association among people who are very learned, look, Plato and the idea of academy, or Aristotle and the idea of peripatetics, who were wandering people, wandering scholars, able to discuss things while standing or just walking and discussing philosophical themes. They were all friends. It was very deeply believed that friendship is the path to the truth. And that was for many, many years. And that's why I believe that the university is a place where you can become a human being, a citizen, a good partner, a friend, someone loyal to society, someone loyal to your friends. You understand your responsibilities, your duties. And I deeply believe that the university is a place where you can rehearse your life the way it will come. At the same time, you may anticipate something that may happen in the world at any time. And for this reason, I believe that the university is a place which has created the best case scenario for the world. Because we don't know what is going to happen. We live in a very unpredictable world. I have to say that we live in a world where Nobel Prize winners in economics are unable to explain the roots of the crisis. You know, if we have a euro crisis in the European Union, not a single Nobel Prize winner was able to offer his or her plausible explanation what happened to Europe. There were so many conflicting interpretations which came from, you know, so many people. But at the same time, what is obvious is that the only place where we can hope for a serious alternative, for a serious alternative scenario, is a university. Because the university is a place where people who come from warring countries or warring societies may establish friendships. I will never forget some episodes from my teaching at Bologna. Vytautas Magnus University is a very close friend and partner of Bologna. We have a MIRES program where we have our partners from Slovenia, Slovakia, Hungary, Italy, Russia. And I remember I had in my academic auditorium, in my class, I had people from Georgia and Russia. At the time, there was a conflict, a military conflict between Georgia and Russia. Normally, I would never have had such a situation, and I thought it would be impossible to imagine them to talk to each other. They did. In my class, people did. They talked to each other. I had people from Kosovo, Albanian young people from Kosovo. Now they are politicians or very prominent political figures. At the time, they were students. And just imagine Kosovars, young Albanians, sitting in that same classroom with Serbs. I had Serbs students and I had Kosovars. They were talking to each other. There was not a single problem that could have somehow prevented them from talking to one another. That's why I believe that sometimes politics becomes a reason why we have so many conflicts in the world, especially when this politics is untalented, poor, unimaginative, very bad, insensitive. But the university is a place where you can create an alternative. Well, if you went crazy, if you went wild, it's okay, but we will come up with an alternative. We will talk to one another. We will find a solution. We will establish a human connection from the very beginning, from scratch, so to say.
Thank you, Leonidas.
Yeah.
I especially liked the idea that you mentioned, the idea of university as a laboratory, and especially international university as a laboratory of modern life. When I look at students, I think for the first time, I actually didn't mention one important date. This year we are celebrating 25 years since Vytautas Magnus University was re-established in Kaunas. Vytautas Magnus University was established in Kaunas in 1922, but it was closed down after the Second World War in Soviet times because it didn't meet all the expectations, and thankfully it didn't meet all the expectations of the occupier. But in 1989, so 25 years ago, the university was re-established. And actually, we have a beautiful slogan. We have 25 here, and we have a beautiful slogan. We call that we have 25, or we live here 25 hours. So 24 plus 1. And we have this metaphor saying, which means that at VDU, we live our lives so intensively, so creatively, so that one day and night it's not only 24 hours, it's 25 hours. And it's because it is a very international university. I think for the first time in those 25 years, international group of students has reached 5% of our full student body. So we are equal with Helsinki University, which is again another Baltic university. We call it Baltic University. So being an international university, being in Kaunas, being at the Baltic Sea, being located in this geographic area, I think it's especially meaningful and important for us. So with this emphasis, I would like to ask you, Leonidas, because we put in our title what it means living and studying in Kaunas and VDU. We put the place, the name of the place. So do you think geography matters in these complex times? Because we can travel, we can move, we can make our choices, and we can move and travel and study and do research in different places. What it means to come to Kaunas?
I deeply believe that everything is meaningful in our life. So when we come to a place, we have to experience its past, we have to experience its present, and it's impossible to imagine oneself, just bypassing some facts of life. So when I came to Kaunas for the first time, I remember, to Vytautas Magnus University, to VDU, so that was something special, precisely because I myself was not from that university. I remember at the time I lived and worked in Klaipėda, in another town of Lithuania. And it just happened to me that I came to Vytautas Magnus, which was re-established in 1989, and I came in 1991, and I was struck from the very beginning by the difference which that university was making. It was a very different university. I remember at the time, as a typical young person from that epoch, I remember a very hierarchical relationship between professors and students. I became a young doctor and young professor myself, and I was trying very hard to be more democratic and more available than my predecessors and my own professors. But I remember when I came to Vytautas Magnus, I was captivated by the very, very obvious difference between Vytautas Magnus and the rest of Lithuanian universities. I remember the staircase like this you're sitting on. It was the staircase. During the conference, students were escorting and leading guests to the conference rooms. There were some plenary sessions and there were some separate debates. And students were escorting us, meeting with beautiful English. And I remember I thought a young professor in blue jeans, in a jacket, and young students who were just talking to us, and they were sitting together studying something. And I thought such a democratic, almost idyllic picture that is very difficult to see elsewhere. But seriously, I think that Vytautas Magnus is a double-fold phenomenon. On the one side, it's an historic university of Lithuania. It has its history, which is quite rich. At the same time, it was rebuilt in 1989, and that was its second life. And these two lives are complementing one another in a very rich way. I know that historically speaking, Vytautas Magnus was very important because it was established in 1922, like Professor Auksė told you. It was the University of Lithuania. Then it was renamed after the Grand Duke of Lithuania, Vytautas Magnus, in 1930. And Vytautas Magnus was a place which educated the elite of Lithuania. Pre-war Lithuania had its elite, which was inseparable from this university. And there were very glorious professors. Like, just imagine, for a young country, Lithuania was just becoming independent after 1918, after the First World War. And of course, the new university was lacking some celebrity professors from Europe. And the first ones that came from Germany or Russia or France were very, very special figures. For instance, Vasily Sezeman, who was a philosophy professor. This is a very European story. Look, he had his Russian-German mother and Finnish-Swedish father. He was born in a place which is now Russia, which is Vyborg. At the time it was Karelia and part of Finland, Viipuri. So he was a Finn of Swedish background. He went to St. Petersburg, Russia, to spend his days with his mother, who was a Russian-German. He spoke Russian, German, Finnish, and Swedish. He was a classmate with Nikolai Hartmann, a famous German philosopher. Finally, he moved to Marburg, Germany, where he became a very promising German philosopher. Finally, he chose Kaunas. He accepted the call, becoming a legendary professor of philosophy here, Vasily Wilhelm or Vasily Sezeman. Then it was a very sad life. He shared the fate of Lithuanians. He married a beautiful young wife, and after the Second World War, the happiness was over because he was sent to Siberia, he was exiled, but he survived, he returned, he was not allowed to teach in Kaunas anymore, he went to Vilnius, and since the regime was trying to keep him away from students, they allowed him to teach the only discipline, the most neutral one from the point of view of ideology, and that was logic. He was allowed to teach logic. God forbid philosophy of history or culture or political philosophy, just logic. Or, for instance, another person who was very special, who was a Russian religious thinker, Lev Karsavin. He was kicked out from the country by the Bolsheviks after the revolution. He lived in Paris, France, and Lithuania called on him to become professor of cultural history at Vytautas Magnus. Lev Karsavin came all the way down from Paris to Kaunas, becoming professor. He became, like Karsavin, a fluent speaker of Lithuanian, very, very swiftly. And he became a legendary professor who wrote beautiful works in Lithuanian, and he spoke beautifully. And he was sent to Siberia as well. So they experienced every single aspect of Lithuanian life and tragedy. But what is very interesting is that at that time, Vytautas Magnus was a place where the young country, the young state, was able to have European figures, European celebrities, like Sezaman or Karsavin. And this university was closed down by the Soviets in 1951, if my memory serves me, after the Second World War. And when it was rebuilt in 1989, on the one side, I believe that Vytautas Magnus is still celebrating its beautiful history. At the same time, it had a double life. It became very modern, very international. Since Lithuanian emigres from the United States and Canada were very active in reestablishing Vytautas Magnus, it became English-speaking, multilingual, very multicultural, very open-minded, very open-ended, very available. And personally, I believe when I was, well, in 1991, my dear ones, I was just a kid with many dreams. But in any case, when I was here at Vytautas Magnus, I thought that was the most beautiful moment I saw in my life as a young academic. Very democratic, very enchanting university. So then I had my life as a wandering scholar working elsewhere in England, America, Hungary, Estonia, Finland, Sweden. But I always dreamed about to return to Lithuania, and of course my choice, a silent one, was Vytautas Magnus. And much to my happiness, that became a fact of my life. But I have to say that what is really special, without praising it up to the skies, I would say, of course, we have our, I would say, problems, and we know that something remains to be desired, something remains to be done better. But in any case, I believe that Vytautas Magnus became, it is very Lithuanian, it is very historically rooted, very sensitive to its history. At the same time, it's very modern. It's very open. And this combination is the only one which works in the 21st century. Be yourself, celebrate your culture, celebrate your life, celebrate your background, but be open to the world. It's impossible to be otherwise. And this is what is very important here. Yeah.
I almost wanted to applaud here. Yeah. It's really beautiful. Yeah. I like one keyword which you have mentioned several times in your ideas. That's an alternative. I think Vytautas Magnus University was established as an alternative in 1922. It was re-established in 1989 as an alternative. I think it is an alternative in many, many ways. I think Kaunas, the city where we are based, is also an alternative. Mm-hmm. In many ways, we can think that actually it is a city where the modern architecture of Lithuania was born. Modern university was born in 1920s, 1930s. We can see many signs and also in many ways how we structure our programs, studies, lectures, communication with friends, students. It's alternative to really well-established, really scheduled, scripted formats and plans. I think that's the beauty of life, which allows everyone to self-actualize ourselves. For a student, for a teacher, for a professor, for a listener of an interesting debate and lecture who comes to Vytautas Magnus University. So here, I also would like to stress, you mentioned several times, interlinguistic approaches that we apply here, international, interdisciplinary. I think also another keyword, it's not only alternative, but I like from our conversations with Leonidas, is this cutting edge approach. So we really cannot understand our modern and complex life without really letting loose many things, allowing ourselves to, well, open eyes, be more open, empathic, tolerant to places, to friends. So here I would like to ask your personal approach, your personal view, because Leonidas is also, as I mentioned, professor from a big P letter, capital letter P, but he's also very, very nice and dear colleague. But I would like also to know, because Leonidas is also a writer. He has written numerous books, academic books, but beautifully put into essayistic format, which shows feelings, which allows us to really understand, really to get into the soul of things that he's talking about. So here comes the question. What is literature to you? What is history to you as a professor, as a writer, as a human being? What is art to you?
Well, it's a very difficult question. I have to say that, in fact, I have to struggle very hard with myself because many words come to my mind, and it's very difficult to choose or to pick the right ones. Because, in fact, I remember Czesław Miłosz, a great Polish poet, writer, and thinker born in Lithuania. I would say a Lithuanian Polish writer and poet, the Nobel Prize winner, a genius, one of the geniuses of the 20th century. Once he put it in the following way, that in fact literature is something that comes to humanity very seldom. It's not always that people call literature what it is. In fact, literature is a gift of life. It's a gift of our existence. It comes not very frequently. And sometimes we have very happy moments when we can experience literature. It's very much the same as, to experience real friendship. We are suffering from the inflation of terms. We know sometimes we call love and friendship things that do not merit these words. But in fact, in our age of the inflation of terms, sometimes we know that there is such a thing as love. There is such a thing as friendship. Very much the same with literature. And when you have this miracle, when 5-7 pages can open up the world for you, you realize that it's something mystical about a good piece of literature, a good piece of art. When I was young, I thought, due to my naivete, that there is something philosophical, very reflexive about literature. Not so. Now I think in a very different way. I think that 2-3 pages of Ernest Hemingway, for instance, or Isaac Bashevis Singer are more precious than probably hundreds of pages of very bombastic philosophical treatises. So I would say that literature in its distilled and very pure form is a miracle, because sometimes 5-10 pages, as I told you previously, can open up the real mystery of human life. I cannot help myself from quoting very beautiful words from Isaac Bashevis Singer, a Jewish writer whom I like very much. He was born in Poland and much of his time in New York City, but he was trying to remember what happened to him in his childhood in Poland. And he thought that literature was a form of memory. Because we are doomed to forget many things, he thought literature is a rescue. It comes as a rescue, it allows us to remember. Otherwise, we would erase much of the world from our memory. And once he told that literature shouldn't try to be similar to the science. Literature is not a science. Literature is not a religion either. Literature is not a philosophy either. Literature is something that allows you to understand, and now I quote, that in fact, what we call causality is just a mask on the face of destiny. Literature and art allow us to understand that. We have many illusions about the availability of the world. We think that we know really much about it. But didn't you experience a moment in your life when sometimes you found yourself thinking that you didn't know your friend, you didn't know your mother, you didn't know your brother? There is something that just crosses your mind as if to say that up to now I fed myself with an illusion that I do know. I don't know this person. There is something deeply mysterious about him or her. And that's why it's very naive and even dangerous to think that we can exhaust humanity in terms of knowledge or or exhaust another human individual. I believe that it's infinity. There is something infinite, absolutely infinite about every human being. And Isaac Bashevis Singer put it in the very, very eloquent way by saying that causality is just a mask on the face of destiny. Art and literature are about mystery of human life. And I believe they are very important for me, because sometimes when we have rational tools, if we study science, for instance, we can study engineering, physics, mathematics, chemistry, we can study the humanities or the social sciences. In any case, we can operate with mathematical models, we can operate with very logical and very rational explanations. But there are some moments when we realize, I didn't know what is the meaning of that beautiful flower. I didn't know how it came into existence. I didn't know how my little brother or little sister thought about the world and me when he or she was 5. This is literature, and this is art.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I think in Leonidas, in your words, Leonidas, there is this call. We have to read. We have to remember how to read. And we have to read novels, books, poems, essays. And there is all the treasure of civilizations. I think our academic hour is very close to end. I would like to ask, do we have some questions in the audience?
If there are some hesitance, so in the meantime, I would just offer one sentence. Also, you asked about Kaunas as a sort of rescue of Lithuania, as this, I would say, as an alternative scenario. In fact, what is interesting, that Kaunas in the 20th century has been something like an early warning system of Lithuania, or an emergency exit. When Lithuania lost Vilnius, its capital city, Kaunas became a capital, which was a miracle, because when Lithuania was part of the Russian Empire, Kaunas was a provincial town. It was a small town. And then in the 1920s, it was developed into a beautiful metropolis, very vibrant, with wonderful cultural life, with celebrities in the academia, in art, artistic life. It had people who were celebrated in other cultures, like a great Finnish writer, Henry Parland, who was a nephew of Vasily Sezeman, who lived in Kaunas, and who was a very young bohemian character, full of romances with, with ballet dancers. But at the same time, it was Emmanuel Levinas, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century. He was to become a French philosopher. He spent the rest of his life in France, but he was born here in Kaunas. He was of Jewish background. He spoke Lithuanian, Yiddish, Russian. He became a French speaker. And until the Second World War, it was still possible to visit Lithuania, and he used to come every summer vacation to visit Lithuania. So Manuelis Levinas was very much of a Kaunas person. He was born here. Kaunas developed its very special academic artistic alternatives, becoming a beautiful city in terms of the Jugendstil architecture, modern functionalism. In Kaunas, you can enjoy the most beautiful architecture in Lithuania, probably in the Baltic states, from the 1920s and 30s, when, in fact, Lithuania was becoming quite advanced. Vilnius is a beautiful city, no offense, I love it very much, but it's a beautiful Italian-style Baroque city. But when it comes to the 20th century, Kaunas was a miracle. It was just a jump, a giant's leap, that Kaunas became a vibrant metropolis. And it became an emergency exit. It became a metropolis of Lithuania, of modern Lithuania. And after the Second World War, what was interesting was that history repeated itself. In 1991, when Lithuania was an independent state already, and there was a military coup in Moscow, there was a military operation in Vilnius to stop the functioning of the TV center in Vilnius. And they succeeded, but then it was Kaunas which opened another TV center, and Lithuania had its TV system for a while. It was the main source of information for the rest of the world. So for the second time in its history, Kaunas became an emergency exit for Lithuania. So there are many jokes about Kaunas as a rival of Vilnius, as the second city. Well, there are many jokes about the first and the second cities in Europe. I know one from Sweden. In Gothenburg, they love this city, and I lived in Gothenburg for a year. And they say about Stockholm, which is a beautiful city as well, of course, they say that, look, we celebrate Gothenburg, we love it. And we think that the best thing in Stockholm is a fast train from Stockholm to Gothenburg, which they call X2000. So X2000, that's the best. Incidentally, I knew that there is a very similar joke in Portugal. They say that the best thing in Lisbon is a fast train to Porto. Well, but in any case, there is this rivalry between the first and the second city, but in fact, I think it's a very beautiful complementarity. Vilnius is Vilnius, it's very special, and so is Kaunas, which is very different, very special. And I believe that you will fall in love with this very charming, very open, and very sensitive city. In many ways, Kaunas is very friendly and very sensitive, I believe so.
Again, very beautiful. These keywords, Kaunas, Vytautas Magnus University, were in the title that we proposed for our session today. I think there are many other keywords that were mentioned in your discussion, in your presentation, Leonidas: alternative, interdisciplinarity, literature, novels, friendship, sensitivity, empathy. I think the picture of Vytautas Magnus University, of Kaunas, is becoming more complete. I think next time when you stroll around the city, when you walk in the streets of Kaunas, look at the buildings, because these are indeed books that you can read. You can see modernist architecture, you can see Bauhaus architecture, international style, and you can really get a feeling that how important was city in early 20th century, in 1920s, 1930s. Today, when we stroll around Kaunas, we see this history around us. We are different people, we are traveling, we have many friends. You came from many different countries. You have chosen Kaunas and the geographic place of Lithuania, which is a small country. As a Baltic state, it's the biggest. Well, Finland, it's now called the Nordic country, but in the beginning of the 20th century, it was called the Baltic state. I always like to refer to Finland. That's again another thing that we have in common with Leonidas. We indeed love Finland and we love Nordic countries, but we love Kaunas, we love Lithuania. And here I perhaps will try to put final touches in our discussion. I especially liked the idea of Central and Eastern Europe, which emerged in your presentation, and you mentioned the name of Czesław Miłosz. Then you mentioned literature, you didn't mention the name of Milan Kundera. But I think when we see Lithuania as a small country, as a small geographic spot, I think, would you say that geography is in some ways important? Because it combines memories, it combines histories, it combines emotions. But by studying smallness, we are becoming familiarized with bigness, with what human civilization is or what it could become. Then by studying Lithuania, we understand what Central and Eastern Europe is, what European Union is, because it's my apology now, I forgot to mention that Leonidas is a member of European Parliament. So my apology as a host.
It's a passing thing.
As a host, I forgot to mention it in the beginning. So it comes in the end. But through this kind of academic and intellectual exercise in parallel, Lithuania, Baltic states, Central and Eastern Europe, European Union. So where is Lithuania in Europe, in European Union? Where is our academia, Vytautas Magnus University, among European universities, us as citizens of Kaunas, as citizens of European Union?
Yes, of course, it's very difficult to comment on something you love. And of course, when you love your country, it's very difficult to comment on it as if it were an object, a physical object. But of course, I would try to imply that, in fact, Lithuania is very charming and beautiful precisely because it contains so many things. It's a small country, but with so many influences. Historically, Lithuania would have been inseparable from Polish, Russian, Belarusian, Ukrainian, Jewish, German, Nordic influences. So it's very, very densely packed with historical experience. And I think that if you want to find a small place very rich of history, smelling with history, that's Lithuania. I think no one no one has ever said better than Czesław Miłosz in Lithuania. When he, holding his Nobel Prize speech, Nobel Prize address, he said in the following way that it's good to be born in a small country with big history. That was Czesław Miłosz. Instead of talking about Poland, which is his country, naturally, he is a Polish poet. But he spoke about small place where he was born, Shetani in Lithuanian. And he spoke about small place densely packed with history. And I believe that Lithuania, which was historically so multicultural, with its historic communities of Tatars, Karaims, Jews, Russian old believers, Belarusians, Ukrainians, some Renaissance figures and publishers like Franciscus Skorina, the person who published the first Belarusian book in Vilnius, the most eminent Jewish poets and painters in Vilnius. When we utter the word Vilnius, it suffices to remember some friends of Amedeo Modigliani in Paris, Chaim Soutine, who was trained in Vilnius, a wonderful painter, for instance, or Jacques Lipschitz, born in Druskininkai, wonderful Jewish painters, philosophers, or Lithuanians with a great diaspora in Canada, the United States, Australia. So Lithuania is a country which has its global presence, a small country, but with global presence. And I believe there is something very deeply embedded in Lithuania at this point. If you want to write the history of the 20th century, you can safely pick Lithuania. 2 world wars, 2 occupations, 2 independences, becoming part of the European Union, accessing the European congregation, the European family. I believe that it's very, very difficult to find another country which would be so telling in terms of this global change. That's why I love diversity, and Central and Eastern Europe is very good at it. I have to say that, in fact, Milan Kundera was right when he described his country, the Czech Republic. At that time it was Czechoslovakia, when he wrote his essay about Central Europe. He told that this is minimum space with maximum historical presence. So little space and so much history. If we can imagine an opposite version, if we have vast territory with very small presence of history, that would be, I don't think that it would be preferable, much preferable to the first one. So that's why I think Lithuania is a very good choice. What can I say about international student body? It's a gift of life. I believe that it makes the world. It makes the world, and even the history of Kaunas is most telling at this point. Sugihara, the Japanese consul Chiune Sugihara, who saved 12,000 Jewish lives. 12,000 people who were saved by a courageous Japanese diplomat, or some other wonderful things which happened in Kaunas. It tells us about a drama, a tragedy of Europe, where parts of it, sometimes with a triumph of human courage, human spirit, and human freedom, those things were happening here in Kaunas. That's why I believe there is no reason sometimes to go very, very far to a remote island to find or to establish the fact that you have the world. Sometimes it is here, under our noses. So it's very important just to smell, to see, to listen, and to be able to utter the right word. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Leonidas, and now the floor is open. Would you like to ask a question? Because here we have, as I said for the third time, professor from capital T, good lecturer, wonderful person, good writer, excellent writer. So you can ask about many things. How to study, how to make friends.
I don't have recipes, please believe me. I'm very cautious at it. Of course, you know better many things that I do. So, no recipes. But in fact, if you're hesitant, so of course, please remember that, in fact, I will have the privilege to return to my university. I'm so happy about the fact that my term as an MEP is coming to the end, and I will return to my beloved university, Vytautas Magnus. And please believe me, we are very happy to have you. This is our raison d'être. This is the meaning of our existence as a university, to have our international presence, people from various cultures, various countries. I believe this is very important for the university, and And I believe that it's a chance for Lithuania and for Kaunas, well, to tell a beautiful story about those fundamental things. In fact, those things are fundamental. As I told you, many things may be finished because diplomacy, politics, conflicts, international agreements, many things that we believe are central to our life, in fact, they are passing episodes. The most important thing is to have a loyal friend, someone who is able to memorize, to remember, sometimes to speak for you, in some cases to remember you, and very important, to remind you of things to be done and to be spoken. Thank you.